All right, and welcome back to RoomPack's ResEdChat, our podcast for people that work in residence life and college student housing and love talking about nerdy things related to it. So today we've got a little bit of a flip. So you'll notice our frequent host, Dustin Ramsdell, is playing the role of guest, and I'm playing the role of host today. The reason being is Dustin and I were talking as we do regularly, and one of the things that came up as an important topic that people seem to be talking about is if I'm, let's say, leaving residence life or student affairs in general and looking at an EdTech space, what is that like? What are the things I need to think about? It's a very different kind of industry. It has a different set of norms and rules and things like that. And we thought this would be a perfect opportunity for both myself, who works at a software company, but also Dustin, who also has worked at a number of different software and tech related companies, to kind of talk about our experiences, because we also come from two kind of very different types of companies that we've worked for in the past as well. So welcome, Dustin. I don't know if you need to do an introduction for our listeners or not, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. I mean, because I think this is an interesting conversation. Somebody who has worked professionally full time in higher ed tech since 2016. I certainly have a lot to say, a lot of kind of reflected on as we're preparing for this. But I did come up through a very, very traditional path in residence life. So it's always kind of a core part of sort of my perspective and experience and knowledge about just working in higher education, particularly working at an institution. But so I got my undergrad degree at University of Delaware as an RA for 2 years, got my graduate degree at Rutgers University, worked there professionally in res life as well, and then worked 2 years professionally at a small private university up in Maine. And after those two full academic years working in res life at that institution is when I just kind of had that itch, knew I was looking for something different, and kind of stumbled upon an opportunity to work, still supporting students every day at a ed tech company. And my title there was Student Success Advisor. So that kind of set me on this path where I really, was trying to take that as an opportunity to learn as much as I can, and kind of never looked back. I don't know if I will ever work professionally at an institution again, but it's been a really fun experience, I think, to see higher education from a different vantage point, and but still at the end of the day, serve institutions, serve as students, and keep kind of building my professional perspective on the space. So, and I'll dig in more with all of that, but I feel like this conversation in particular, I've seen it really, um, you know, keep kind of coming up more often, and certainly got accelerated a lot as many things did with the pandemic. A lot of people interested in finding full-time remote roles and just sort of having a change of pace where, the day-to-day in higher ed, which is typically pretty routine, was very disrupted. So I think this continues to just be a very timely and relevant conversation, where as we kind of just keep saying kind of the ripple effects of, people really determining sort of the wide breadth of options of what's out there for still being able to work professionally in higher education, not just at an institution.
Yeah, I like to say that you and I went higher education adjacent before it was cool. I think when you and I went, which would have been around the same time, because I've been with RoomPack now, and that's the only place I've worked after leaving the kind of formal university environment for I'm just over 8 years now. So it would have been around that same time frame as you. For my kind of take on it, I kind of gave a little bit of it away. Is when I finished my PhD in higher education, and I was teaching at Boston College at the time. That was my crossroads. What do I want to do next? I originally came in with the idea that I was going to be faculty and I was going to teach because I love doing that. But then when I looked at the reality of what that entails in terms of then having to go get tenure, where the job's located, things like that, I said, this, it's still an option, but I kind of started to narrow down the potential jobs that I would have just based off of my preferences of where I wanted to live and things like that and the lifestyle I wanted. So I looked back into admin that also had those kinds of pluses and minuses, but my research being in kind of technology and college students kind of led me to say, oh, maybe I could work for a company that works with college universities and college students. And that's kind of what really kind of pushed me in towards RoomPact. In terms of kind of your that initial impetus for you, for me, it was like leaving a PhD program. I've kind of got a crossroads nicely laid out before me because I got to find a job now. What was kind of your impetus then to go, oh, maybe I'll work for a company instead? Like, what was there a trigger? Were there multiple triggers there?
Obviously, like I said, like the core of the work, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to serve students, serve institutions, and really feel kind of tethered into that environment in some shape or form. It was really kind of the day to day culture, sort of like the way the organization operated, the tools that they were leveraging. I was finding just that, and I think any institution is on a spectrum with any of this, but like sort of like a just a lack of urgency, a lack of sort of innovative thinking, and just sort of not a lot of resources or a willingness to even really earnestly kind of explore what's out there, even back then in terms of like digital tools to kind of enhance the student experience and everything. So I just was looking for a different environment to do very similar work. And I think that that was sort of the like connective tissue is like, the idea of my first position as a student success advisor, and you see this, I think has really spread pretty commonly across institutions and like companies that support them is being a coach who's reaching out and checking in with students every single day, responding via email or any numbers of means of communication. That was basically what I was doing in res life. Like I was living with them in person in the hall and walking around and kind of checking things out and everything. But like at the core of it, it's just talking with people, troubleshooting, encouraging them, motivating them. So I think uh knowing that they're had to be an opportunity to do that just in an environment that felt more like the kind of the pace that I was looking for, and so the mindset approaching the work utilizing kind of innovative digital tools and everything. So that was kind of that crossroads moment for me, and I think kind of stumbling upon somebody just like sharing it out, and just I feel like sometimes it's just that serendipity, the right place, the right time, noticing it, and just feeling confident enough to take a chance and kind of. Let them tell me no. Don't like sort of make that decision for myself. I'm very grateful for myself, I guess, to feel comfortable enough to take that leap, and for them, I know this is one of my big reflections, I guess, just to sort of like put a stake in this one is that like these organizations, and I saw this in 2016, and I've increasingly seen it at the different organizations that I've worked at. They increasingly understand and value the skills and experience that campus-based professionals have. So if you're like really clear, really concise and specific and confident and showcasing yourself, like that's going to really go a pretty far way versus feeling as though like, oh, well, they don't understand. So maybe I'm going to kind of like, walk it back somehow, or sort of like be kind of humble. These companies that work with institutions want to be able to say that they have people that understand the trials and tribulations of higher ed leaders and how institutions run and everything. Like they want to be able to leverage that perspective, that experience, and have you really informing the way that they approach the work.
Yeah, that really resonates me in terms of, you said wanting a space where you could innovate and do different things that I also found in my higher ed campus based career that was sometimes confining. I think I was actually pretty lucky in that a lot of the institutions I worked at, a lot of the leaders I worked for and with, allowed me a lot of latitude. But I do feel like when I talk about people that I really respect that move into this space, they all do have some kind of a, I don't even know what to call it, entrepreneurial bent or desire to look at things, use the word innovative or in a different way, or that does not follow kind of the traditional structures, format, whatever that usually guide our work on campus. I think that's one of the things that kind of also drew me to it.
Yeah, because I think that's like like I think there's like an alternate universe out. Yeah, like, I think there's, like, an alternate universe out there where if I had worked at somewhere different right out of grad school, I might not have felt that itch where, like, I just think that they, yeah, were for better or worse, like, it was kind of just, like, a very casual culture, like, they just weren't in a rush to do anything, and I think that's fine, like, a lot of institutions just, like, are very based in sort of the routine, the culture, the tradition, like, of kind of just how they've operated and everything, and I think that's certainly part of the reason why, they've existed, many of these institutions for as long as they have. But it's also like, and I think we're seeing this kind of existential crisis kind of play out, that like that is not necessarily it's going to get them to like the next 100 years or whatever. So I think that, yeah, I mean, there's always going to be sort of those push and pull factors. It's not saying that like writ large ed tech is always going to feel vastly more innovative and cutting edge and all that kind of stuff. You have to kind of find the right company doing the right kind of work that's going to kind of click for you and everything. And sometimes you do just kind of have to work through it of actually working there and kind of determining where it's too much of this or not enough of that in terms of just how they approach their work. But yeah, I mean, it really is. It's a very good opportunity if you feel as though you've kind of been that black sheep working on different teams and all that, where it's like, yeah, I mean, I would describe this institution as innovative, or I feel like my position has been able to make sort of positive change, but I do feel like I'm still kind of bouncing up against the walls, the bounds of the sandbox that they've kind of, put me in, and I'd like to be able to stretch maybe a little bit more in a certain area. And if you find the right role at the right company, you can certainly do that.
Yeah. I mean, colleges and universities are generally conservative, meaning lowercase c conservative institutions, right? They are generally slow moving. They are not quick to make decisions, and they're deliberative, for many good reasons. And some positive effects come out of that, but also some negative effects come out of that as well. And, when you mentioned that, ed tech companies valuing folks who have that background, it kind of reminded me that my colleague Jong, who does our sales, does not have a residence life higher ed background. He was an RA for like a private housing company, and so he has a little bit. He understands it. He's learned it over time, but that is not his extensive background like it is mine. And one of the things that he very quickly realized is, as the person who does sales, he's like, the sales cycle for universities is long, meaning a university doesn't just go, oh, we need software, and then next week they have software. It could be like, oh, we need software, and then 3 years later they get that piece of software or that piece of technology, right? Like it's a very long process. And for ed tech companies, having people that know how to navigate that, understand how that works, understand what has value, what has currency in those spaces, both in a sales way, but also I think just in a providing value and continuing experience kind of way, is critical. I mean, that's I think one of the things that, if folks think about, oh, maybe I want to go into some kind of ed tech type space, like you said, like there is that value there.
Yeah, because I think it adds to their, as the company trying to sell something, like the trustworthiness, or just sort of like, they can much more speak the language. And I think this also, like, depending on if they're working more in kind of an academic affairs space versus student affairs, or who their kind of target audience is. I think just people who uh yeah, even just the smallest dose. It doesn't have to be where it's like, oh, I've worked 30 years as a faculty member, and now I'm going to move over to this company, and like that's the prerequisite or anything. It's just like, yeah, even that just a brief exposure of just like know enough to be dangerous kind of thing. I think, not feeling as though if you're, earlier in your career, you have to kind of wait your turn. It's like, I think nowadays we're just seeing a lot more sort of, uh, opportunity for those sort of career pivoters and changers to kind of say like, all right, well, yeah, I've worked at the institution for a couple of years. Like, I do think that I'd like a change. I'd work at, want to work. And I think this is an important distinction too. Like, I want to work at a company that markets directly to students. Like, I love, kind of living in that environment of engaging those students directly, or I want to work at a company that works directly with institutional leaders. And then again, like, who are those people that we're trying to uh, engage about our platform or product? So I think those are parts of it of like, what is the institution sort of producing and selling? Who are they selling it to? And then like, what is your part in that? Because I think those are two pretty, I would say more often than not, pretty separate segments. If you're like a direct, B2C, like, or B2B kind of thing, like those language, like, are you selling directly to students about using your study tool, or are you trying to equip a, higher leader at an institution with a platform to manage their tutoring services or something? Like, those are kind of maybe going to end up in the same place where like more students are passing their classes and retaining and graduating and all that good stuff. It's two very different angles. And I think, if you're sort of reflecting, that's going to be part of it, where you can hopefully start to kind of focus like, well, okay, well, I'm not going to apply to this company because fundamentally the work they're doing, I feel like, just doesn't resonate with what I'm, hoping to do. So that would be another kind of quick reflection and tip for folks to be thinking about.
Yeah. I mean that's another thing is I think sometimes, especially folks that are initially starting this kind of exploration, is really important to highlight is that EdTech is not a monolith. I mean, within EdTech, are we talking about a higher education community? Are we talking about K through 12? Are you know, you mentioned, is it going directly to students? Is it going to an institution who then works with students utilizing it? How is that company structured? What is its purpose for being? You've worked for a few different companies right now. Is it three? How many kind of different EdTech companies have you?
Three different categories of companies, I would say. So, two online program managers, OPMs, as they're often called in the industry. So, both of those were in student support roles. One, I did marketing at an ed tech company that created digital experience platforms for institutions to use, sort of enterprise, across campus. And then currently, I work at a marketing agency that works with institutions on more of a program level to market. Maybe a school level market programs or revamp websites and all that. So I feel like those are three good examples of ways that you could work, you could say air quotes ed tech, because like this marketing agency anymore is like digital marketing. We're doing website redevelopment and SEO audits and analysis and optimizations and all this. Like so much of it is sort of empowered by HubSpot as like a marketing tool. So like everything is sort of incorporated in that. So there is a lot of kind of technical pieces to it. And then the idea of working like at an ed tech company that is trying to sell this platform directly to institutions, like that is sort of one format. And then online program managers, we're part of this big wave of kind of enabling institutions to build out their digital education portfolios. And they're honestly kind of like sunsetting, really. Like that's part of the market is reached its peak and is consolidating, because a lot of institutions now are kind of going their own way with building that out. But like the idea of the way that like just OPMs created contracts and all that, like that, I feel like is just its own sort of separate environment to work in. So yeah, three pretty distinct experiences that yeah, I can certainly speak more to. Or
Well, and you mentioned kind of that last one that you were mentioning in terms of like that's kind of reached its peak and it's consolidating. I mean, I think that highlights kind of harkening back to when we said, you know, universities are generally little c conservative environments. They're durable. They've been around for hundreds of years in many cases. Versus looking at jobs in an industry where it feels like things can change very rapidly. How have you kind of navigated that? Because I feel like for some higher ed people that may be a little bit, it may be scary, maybe a little bit of a shock, because it's thinking about, you know, your work differently. You don't have the same level of security I think that most college universities provide you with, where you know, you feel like, oh, well, I've got my job and I can just stay in this forever or stay at this institution forever, which is not always the case anymore, but still, I'd say certainly much more so than other industries. How did you kind of navigate that?
yeah, I mean, I'll say initially, like one just thing that I wrote down like immediately is like, I mean, expect a bit of a culture shock once you start. Like it is like as we're saying, it is a different environment. There's gonna be a lot of different language. I didn't fully sort of comprehend or sort of know, I guess, what I was in for, that I feel like it was years of just sort of kind of learning new things and all that. But I think it's just, you know, how we're kind of talking about it. There's good and bad. So if you just know better going in, that awareness can be really helpful. But, it's the idea that uh, entering into working in a corporate environment in tech, like promotions and bonuses and things are like more common. Like you're going to have very clear metrics that you're measured on and goals that you're trying to achieve on a quarterly basis. Like often you'll live more by quarters than semesters, and that can kind of take some getting used to. And even just having uh, very clear quantitative targets that you need to hit and you'll be measured against on a pretty routine basis, and likely have like performance reviews like more commonly. So I think like it's really understanding as much as you can, like taking the time to understand those policies, procedures, and being sort of uh, empathetic to like why those are in place. Because I think it could feel very, like you said, sort of like scary or sort of abrasive. I guess that is sort of like all this sort of like scrutiny happening about like the job you're doing, how you're doing it, all that. But I think again, all companies are going to do this differently, but that's part of, I think, where I found so much more sort of reassurance, honestly, because I think sometimes you can work at like an institution and you have that one annual performance review. Like otherwise, like there's not necessarily a structure in place to make sure that that you're doing a good job, whether you're performing to contribute to sort of the health of your program, your department, your division, and all those sort of things. So I think it took a bit of time for me to acclimate, but uh, again, that's part of it's like it would be hard for me to go back because I think sometimes like just those structures aren't in place to evaluate performance and reward, the high performers. And like you said, sort of like the idea of like layoffs, I would say are likely more uh, common in companies, especially like we're just kind of going through a very wild time and sort of at tech and funding is kind of dried up. But I don't know, like it just I think my advice, the idea of like how I now sort of approach this is like just be very curious, ask a lot of questions, spend time talking to people, and try to like affirm what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Like have like quick little informal one-on-ones with your colleagues and say like, "Am I to understand this correctly? Like it seems like we prefer to do things this way or that way," because like otherwise you might be making assumptions and then sort of uh, making choices that aren't congruent with just the way that that culture operates where like you might work at a company and it's like, hey, actually they seem to prefer talking over Slack versus email, and they'll do like quick huddles through Slack and not do proper Zoom calls or whatever, like, and that just can help uh, you be in the best position to feel comfortable and feel uh, confident that you're doing things in the way that maybe like sort of the unspoken rules, because like they just move quick and they don't necessarily take the time to elaborate in it in full detail. And Yeah, so I think this one, like, it's a very sort of squishy emotional part of it, that idea of just, like, how does it feel to work in such a, like, a different environment? And I think it's just really that acknowledgement that, like, there is gonna be that culture shock, there's a lot to learn, but try to just be, uh, patient, be curious, and, know that it might take a while because you probably at least have to get through a whole year of just all the different things that sort of come up of, like, because I, like, wrote down and elaborate on this when I was just sort of, like, doing my brainstorm dump of, like, stock options. Like that was something I had no idea how that works and all that. And I feel like I'm still learning about it, but that's something usually like after a couple months, they're like, "Hey, here's your stock options," and it's just sort of like, I don't know what this is. I don't know how this works. And you can sometimes ask some people in like HR and stuff, but like you might feel kind of weird about like, am I supposed to like ask about this? Is it like it's financial stuff or whatever? So like, yeah, there's just so much, and I think yeah, you just have to kind of have that awareness going in that it's going to be maybe a little bumpy with just sort of like the knowledge base that you have kind of existing in that environment.
Yeah, especially for like you and I entering into this space after we had already worked in a higher ed setting for a while, right? It's not like we left college, we immediately went into this kind of environment. So stock options would have been something that we would have learned about earlier on in our careers. There is a bit of like learning and relearning in that. I guess one other thing I wanted to kind of touch on too is what about started to get into this with like the different stylistic differences, but what even about the different like types of companies? Like um, working for a company that's been around for a long time, working for a company that's been around for a year, working for a company that's bootstrapped, meaning they funded themselves, working for a company that took on a whole bunch of investors, working for a company that consolidated with all these other different companies. Do you have insight into that? Because I think frequently when people ask me, because I get asked like, oh, I want to do what you do, I want your job. One of the things I try to explain is my job is very different from the same job at another company, just in terms of the structure of it, how it came to be, and things like that. That just influences like my work environment. Have you encountered that, especially since you've done more kind of switching between companies than I have? So I think you probably have better perspective on this than I do.
Yeah, what's been kind of funny is I've gone progressively smaller in terms of the organization size from my first job. So that's been kind of interesting to kind of examine. So I was, yeah, like the size of the company, if it spans like international, those are just going to be, parts of, how much do you want that sort of like sense of urgency, the fast pace? Like those are going to be things that sort of slow down a company if they're, uh, you know, 100-year-old company that is a publicly traded international, consolidation of multiple different companies, like that's probably going to be, slower pace. That they're going to have benefits of a lot of resources and things like that. But it also kind of feel like sort of a cog in a wheel, like you're performing your one little function in your department, and um, that is more or less, I think, what certain people are looking for. For smaller and younger companies, like there is going to be more of that fast pace, and I think the important thing there is like how comfortable are you with ambiguity, like because those are going to be things where decisions are happening and then changing, or it's like, hey, we need to do this and it was due yesterday, we got to just going to scramble to get it done, and that again is going to be more suitable for some people than others. And then I think, yeah, like a big part of it is like, how is this company funded? Are they funding themselves through revenue growth, like as they get new partnerships and clients, that's how they're building their team and kind of improving on their product? Or are they and this is becoming a little bit less dramatic nowadays, like you're not seeing sort of these like huge funding rounds, but a lot of companies still are being funded by huge investment firms. So they're getting valuations and money that's put into them, and they have to kind of follow through on sort of the promises that they're making to these powers that be. And again, that comes with like a huge influx of resources earlier than they might have otherwise, which is great. But I feel as though that often is associated with much more scrutiny. You're going to be held to much higher standard at a company that is uh, trying to make good on kind of the promises that they're making with, investment firms that are coming in and giving them money. But yeah, otherwise, I would say, yeah, it's a good call out too of like, if you're working at a company that has been acquired by another company or vice versa, like, that could just be very quirky depending on where they are in that journey. They could have, if it's recent, they might still have like two different HR systems or two different like insurance plan, like, and those will just be kind of weird things of just like, relating to your fellow colleagues that are just sort of different. But um otherwise it's some kind of subsidiaries and acquired companies like operate pretty independently from their parent company, and um, others like they get acquired and then it's just sort of like chopped up and absorbed and kind of assimilated. So I think those are things that like one of my things that I kind of wrote down too is like, just doing your research. Like, I mean, one part of it is like you do that self reflection about what you want to do, what type of company, and hopefully this conversation has helped people to kind of discern some of those things that they would kind of think on. But if you do your research, like you can understand, like, oh, actually, didn't realize this company is owned by this bigger company, like, and just take that information, process it, and sort of just figure out like, is that fine? Like, is that okay? Like, what do I let me learn more about this company that owns them, like, and see what's going on there, like, because that's going to, um, yeah, just kind of create a different environment, for that company that you work at if they are, beholden to a different company, because often they're probably going to be trying to like have the lowest amount of cost and the most amount of revenue, so like you're probably going to feel at times like you have a lot of support and resources, but at other times it's like, well, we are just kind of a small department within this greater organization, and they really are looking to, you know, get a certain output from us, as part of their whole portfolio. So, yeah, all really important things to consider and think about. And I mean, as much as like the ed tech market, I feel like it's sort of just always in flux. Like I'm always seeing job openings. I'm always seeing, new companies founding and is out there. So I think it's just the idea of trying to kind of, catch the waves as they come and sort of see, keep an eye and an ear for what's out there, and, try to network with people and, get to know like firsthand what their experience is like as you're sort of doing the exploration. Cause, certainly every company's website is going to portray them in a very positive light. So it's like, that is part of it. That is important. Look at their website, understand how they speak about themselves, but also try to get, a little bit more of anecdotal insights as well as much as you can.
Yeah, and I think it's similar to, if you're looking at different campus-based positions, right? Different institutions do things differently. Is it a private university? Is it a public university? Is it for profit, non for profit? Is it religiously affiliated? I think one thing that I try to impress on people when they start looking at tech is you need to look at those same kinds of things. But of course, I think the range of those things in ed tech is even broader, meaning in higher ed, you can be like, okay, here's, the range, and I know what those are. But in ed tech, that can be a number of different things going on: company culture, how did it start? How long has it been in operation? What does that mean? Are they beholden to anyone other than themselves? What are their values? How do they live those out, etc.?
Well, and I'll say, like, it is even like there is at least a commonality of like there are publicly traded companies versus private companies, and that's going to be similar to like a public, institution versus a private institution of just like how they have to kind of be transparent. But like certain private and private companies, like I know, like you all, like you put out reports and all that, like, and sometimes like I've seen this mostly with like OPMs that I'm more closely acquainted with, like they have often had the sort of light of scrutiny kind of shined upon them, and like that they are transparent because people are like looking at them, like they're trying to be like, hey, whoa, 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 we're cool. Everything's above board here. But like, I feel like they wouldn't have done it if people weren't sort of being like, hey, you like come testify before Congress or this or that, the other. It's like, that's just like, I'm sure stressful for certain people where it's just like, I don't want to have to like work at a company that's like having to like defend themselves before Congress. Like this is fun. So yeah, I mean, those are like just different kind of details. I think that, yeah, I mean, it's good advice. I think, yeah, just kind of getting those on people's radar to be examining, where it might be that like if it's be like, I don't want to work at a publicly traded company, that seems like it's not fun. Like I've worked at a public institution, I'm gonna go like private corporations and all that, like, that's hopefully, I think, like through all of this, like if you can just give yourself a little bit more focus with like the type of roles and the type of companies that you're looking for, because again, like there is just ample opportunity out there. I think certainly not as much. It's I think, in this moment in time, I would say that's a little bit more competitive than it has been in years past. But I mean, yeah, just focus is going to be kind of the name of the game.
Yeah, I mean, think about your values. It's hard to know before you jump into it what that looks like, but I basically work for what's a small family owned business with no desire to take on capital or sell or anything like that, which is just a very different company. When I have some friends that work in more corporatized environments, and I just hear them talk, and I'm like, I could never. I have no desire. I went on vacation with my one of my good friends who works at EdTech, and I was just hearing her on a call with all these like corporate buzzwords coming out of her mouth. And after her call, I was like, how can you stand that? And she's like, honestly, Paul, I hate myself. And I was like, okay, because I didn't really think that was kind of you. She's like, hey, but this is what I do, right? And in her case, this is a little bit more of a means to an end, and she's okay with that. I would not even be able to make it that far. But some people thrive in those kinds of environments. If I were to give a piece of advice kind of related to what you said, then, especially for folks in housing, when you go through those vendor fairs at Kuhuai or wherever that may be, talk to those companies, but also about themselves. Like learn about it, because there's a lot of companies in that space that are very different from each other, right? Like having been around that vendor area for a number of years, I've seen brand new companies pop up and disappear within the span of 2 years. I've seen multiple companies now become one company. I've seen, the companies that have been around forever, and ones that are more newly established. And I think that's like a great space, because probably those vendor folk will talk to you about, oh, this is what our company's like and things like that if you ask. And I don't know that I've ever been asked about that in that space before. Maybe you don't want to tip your hat that you're looking at leaving your job, so that might be why. But it is an opportunity to kind of have those discussions. Do you have any? Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to ask you. Do you have any other practical kind of tips or things people looking down this path that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, LinkedIn has been a great resource for me just to put myself out there, build my network, see jobs that are available. Um, but I think that is not the end all be all. A lot of these smaller companies in ed tech will just be posting jobs on their website, and you just need to like know who they are, maybe follow them on social. Those share it on their own social platforms. So I think some diligence there is kind of time well spent. And then I do think I'll just sort of like kind of bold, underline, circle what you said of like, talking to these people, because that's part of the networking piece of that, like just literally like adding people to your LinkedIn network, ad hoc, and they, if you've never spoken to them or whatever, it's like, if it is a type of, if it's a person with the type of role that you would like to have, or works at a company that you'd like to be a part of, or, all the above, just having that conversation. Because I think those are the moments, like you said, like you can hopefully get an opportunity to see what is going to differentiate uh, uh, product manager at one company versus another, and also like just what differentiates that company uh from others in the space. So I think, yeah, I mean, trying to do those informational interviews, even like before you're really maybe like fully embracing like a job search, like I think that'll get you to that point of having that level of focus that I think is going to be helpful. Because I think, there's often fell into this temptation of just sort of like play the numbers game, like just kind of apply to as much as you can. But I think, if we're all really honest with ourselves, I think it's like we know, or could and should take the time to figure out, like, yeah, I want to work at a bigger company in person, on a large team, and like start to really be specific with those things. And I've gone through that journey where, like, I've done cycles where I definitely was just kind of scattershotting, and then worked with a career coach, and like they've really helped me to refine that. It was a very insightful experience. And not saying that everybody needs to do that, but I think just that the kind of broad strokes of that sort of exercise, that sort of self-examination, and what is it that I liked most about previous jobs or not, and through informational interviews, like being like, wow, it seems like based on what this person is saying, they're on a big team, and that that sounds great, or they're on a smaller team and that doesn't sound great. Yeah, those conversations I think can be really really insightful.
Well, thank you so much, Dustin, for kind of sharing your knowledge with us. Because I just, the whole impetus behind this was that, well, one post in the expatriates of student affairs Facebook group that got me thinking, like, oh, people want to know about this. People, it's hard when you're in a space as a campus-based professional that's all you've ever known, to just be get like, where do I start? And you start looking at jobs, but you don't know all these other contextual kinds of factors and other things that just take a while to learn about. And so I couldn't think of anyone better in my network to speak to that experience with breadth and diversity and knowledge than you, let alone someone who's normally our host for our podcast that got to get in the hot seat today and play guests. So, any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Well, no, I mean, it's always a pleasure hanging out and chatting, and certainly chatting about this stuff. I mean, it's been such a fun ride working in ed tech, and like I said, still being able to serve students and serve institutions, and just appreciate the opportunity to reflect and share some tips with folks.
Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate it. And for those of our listeners, if you have a topic that you want us to address, just reach out to us at ResEdChat, and we'll see if we can get it on one of our future episodes. Have a great day, everyone.